Welcome to the Energy Thematic Session. We have an amazing panel with us today, and we will be discussing a very interesting subject. Our session is called 100% Renewables, a vision for decarbonization, resilience, and prosperity. And we can break it down in each of these bits. Each word has a very big meaning. So let us start with the vision. The opening of the CVF vision that was adopted in Marrakesh a couple of years ago says that we aim to survive and thrive. And this is in the context in which we will be discussing the commitment to pursue 100% renewable energy. That means that energy will not be only the source of electricity or what we drive cars with. Energy will be so much more than that. It will be a means to the sustainable development and prosperity and inclusion. I'm sure that during this day there will be a lot of discussion about the recent IPCC report, which again strongly stressed the urgency for all of us to act if we are to meet the limits that have been set upon us. But one important thing was also that they stressed that we can do it. We have the means, we have the wisdom to do it, we have the political will that has been demonstrated through a signing of the Paris Agreement, and we can just move on with it. And this is something that we're going to be discussing because renewable energy has been identified by IPCC as one of the key elements of energy transformation and ultimately decarbonization. CVF countries, there are 48 of them. 46 have placed renewable energy in their NDCs, meaning that they have a strategy that will help them achieve their decarbonization through deployment of renewables. But they're not alone. There's 57 countries today. They're committing to 100% of renewable energy. Most of these countries are those that are seeking development. They're trying to catch up and have an inclusive and fair and sustainable future. What does that mean? That means that the countries that have been lagging behind for so long are now having an opportunity to leapfrog and become leaders. They're leaders in the context of deployment of renewables, but they're also moral superpowers because they're victims, the first victims of climate change, and they're taking action. So we have all the ingredients. We have the Paris Agreement that provides us with a long-term strategy, the orientation. We have the technology, the costs are falling, the deployment is becoming increasingly available everywhere. And we have increasingly climate finance that is coming on stream and is becoming available for this purpose. What we don't have is the good mix of how do we mix these three things together and come up with a strategy for decarbonization of the energy system. So we will have interventions from countries, interventions from stakeholders, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector, and having an interesting discussion, interactive discussion on the subject. So I will start with Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the outgoing presidency of CVF, and during the presidency, Ethiopia actually set renewable energy as a priority for the CVF strategy. So given the scale of transformation that needs to happen, what needs to happen to catalyze the action to go further and faster? I will ask Professor Fekadu Beyene to start the discussion. Professor, over to you.
I would like to first thank IRENA, Sustainable Energy for All, and CAN International for supporting the very first CVF energy dialogue that was held at the margins of the high-level political forum in June. I would like to add a few points as to why the deployment of renewable energy is a priority to CVF countries and Ethiopia in particular. During the Ethiopian Championship in Marrakesh, we vote to strive for 100% renewable energy by the year 2050. Our members are mainly low and middle income countries, but our economic are among the fastest growing in the world. And yet, a large proportion of more than 1 billion people living in CVF countries still lack access to electricity. Our forum considers that we have nothing to lose to strive toward this 100% renewable energy. If we could achieve it, we would likely support the other core objectives of our Marrakesh vision, such as to emerge in wealthy nations and to accomplish the sustainable development goals ahead of the 2030 timeframe. If we look only to sustainable development goal number 7, we might consider that without renewable energy, for instance, it might be impossible to supply electricity to remotely located populations in mountainous areas or in small islands. And without energy, poverty is assured. We also consider that if the CVF countries could achieve full exploitation of renewable energy by mid-century or earlier than, we would help to prove that any nation might accomplish the same. When we consider that our countries have the least capacity, it should in fact be much more straightforward for others. And we hope to inspire change everywhere elsewhere to pushing the needle closer towards the fulfillment of 1.5 degrees Celsius limit to warming that is key to our survival and prosperity. We need big countries to act, and we will continue to work for that as a top priority. Ethiopia, like the majority of our fellow CVF countries, explicitly refer to ambitious clean energy initiatives in the national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Of course, we will require support to implement our plans. The current place us among the few countries whose emissions reduction targets are compatible within a 2 degrees Celsius scenario. More precisely, our nationally determined contribution would lead to a reduction of at least 64% below the business as usual scenario by 2030. In addition, we have removed fossil fuel subsidies as of the year 2008. We believe that the elimination of fossil fuel subsidies would make significant contribution to the transformation. Our CRGE aims to develop a further 25,000 megawatt of energy capacity with 22,000 megawatt coming from hydro and the remaining from geothermal and wind. Energy efficiency should be also encouraged through a range of studies and implementations covering the transport, public, household, and industrial sector. So Ethiopia is more than committed to the determined to sustainable development goals, particularly with regard to the 100% use of renewable energy.
Thank you, Professor. And it's very interesting because you raised so many issues that are associated with energy. They're not necessarily energy sector. And I think we're going to have the same theme coming with many of our speakers today. But can you tell us what are the most critical changes that we have to make to face the future effectively?
Yeah, there are two important issues that we need to consider. One is we need to build our capacity. Technical capacity is the most important thing. In order to build technical capacity, we need to collaborate and team up along with the CVF countries. And also we have to voice and urge the developed world to support us in capacity building. The second is a very important one is finance. We have to build also our financial capability, not only by looking for the support from the developed world, but also by engaging private actors and also the public sector. These are the most important issues in order to move forward, in addition to considering the energy efficiency in all sectors.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned in your intervention that the collaboration with others is of critical importance. So I will call on Leonardo Beltran from Mexico. Mexico is not a CVF country, but we wanted to have somebody who is already working quite ambitiously on renewable energy and to give a little bit of an input on what is it you're doing to contribute to this agenda of decarbonization, and what is the advice that you would give to countries that are now starting to embark on the renewable energy path?
Thanks very much, Ms. Press. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I just wanted to say a couple of things about why do we think it's good to have a long-term goal for decarbonization. First, I think you have to start with the leadership. Leadership is, at least in Mexico, that was the driver to make sure that we're going into that path of decarbonization. As the president that it's finishing this administration this upcoming November, when he was a candidate, he pushed forward the agenda of decarbonization by envisioning an energy reform that incorporated sustainability as part of this reform. So, the leadership of the president resulted in developing a pact for Mexico. That pact for Mexico was the opportunity to engage all the different stakeholders into a reform agenda for the country. So the three main political parties got engaged. The left wanted to have a more social agenda. The right, they wanted to have more financial agenda. And then, the center, right, left, the center of President Peña Nieto, he wanted to have these structural reforms that incorporated both the left and the right into the Pact for Mexico. So that leadership resulted in all the structural reforms that were passed in Mexico. And for the energy sector was to make sure that the energy sector was going to be the lever for economic growth, but also that you need to be conscious about the resources you have, the natural capital, and that's why you have to be sustainable in the way you take advantage of the resources. So I guess the first point would be leadership. The second point would be to have vision, short, medium, and long-run vision. That vision is reflected into our legal framework. The legal framework states targets for the short, for the medium, and the long run. Given that the energy sector, it's a sector for long-term investments, you need to have that vision in your policy. Reflected in order to have certainty for private sector participation, certainty about the policy that will be guiding the development of the energy of the sector in your country, and then of course the legal framework has to be conducive for incorporating this new way to do business in your country. So the third component is that we incorporated the market as the model that it's known all over the world. But in order to incorporate much more sustainable energy resources, we devised a policy mechanism called clean energy certificates to make sure that the market has the right signal to incorporate these resources and to be able to compete with the legacy infrastructure or the conventional resources. So the commitment is for the market, the people that take part into the market, they have to demonstrate that have X% of their consumption coming from clean energies. And the policy is devised in a way that every year you have to increase your consumption of clean energies according to a preset timeline for this for the market. So again, it's a leadership. It's a long or short, medium, and long run targets, and then the market or a model that it's conducive for having these different levers to be present at the market, and that have the signal for the private sector participants to come in and make sure that their investments are going to be productive and profitable.
Thank you, Mr. Beltran. There's I wish we had a whole day just to discuss this in detail, because you raised so many interesting questions. I just have a little follow-up question. You mentioned at one point in time that you were looking at the broader impact of your energy transformation. So you were looking. You mentioned you were looking at also the social and economic impacts of that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yes, Ms. Press. The social component. It's one of the key elements. When we started the energy reform process, we needed to engage all the different stakeholders. That included, of course, the legislative power, the executive power, which is, across the board. We needed to have people from social development, from agriculture, given their responsibility about the natural capital. We needed to have people from the environmental office of the president, and with all of them, making sure that we first started with consultation with indigenous communities and local population. What would they like to see in terms of their development? Then once we have these elements on how to progress in that particular area, making sure that bringing energy services to them was done in a way that we can take advantage of indigenous resources, but also making sure that the market model was present if we were to have a sustainable way forward. So in that way, incorporating the different communities into the conversation and into the decision, we were making sure that the energy sector would become a lever for economic growth. And in a similar fashion, it's for the environmental sector. The social consultations were not only happening for productive activities or development activities, but also for developing a baseline on the natural capital that we were going to use in that particular area. So making sure that we have the social, the economic, or the energy components, and also the environmental component present. In that way, we were going to be able to respect what was enacted into or incorporated into the Constitution, which was a sustainable energy sector.
Thank you very much. And the holistic approach to energy transformation is absolutely critical if we are going to achieve what we set to achieve. At IRENA, we looked at a scenario for 2050 and what it actually means and how it can be done. And we concluded that if we were to decarbonize the energy sector, that 90% of that can come from renewable energy and energy efficiency. And but the most interesting part was that the benefits coming from that sort of transition were multiple. The one is the job creation. We estimated about 28 million new jobs will be created. And the impact on health, air pollution, that is absolutely not monetized in the current economic terms. And it actually is something that we have to look much more closely as we are transforming the energy system and looking to achieve Paris Agreement. So I would like to call on Ms. Heda Aderohani now. A couple of weeks ago, we were in Geneva at the first air pollution conference. Leonardo, go ahead.
It's just a follow-up. In your study, actually, Professor Ficare was saying that the big countries have to incorporate into this exercise to make sure that all the countries are present. But in the study that Ms. Press was mentioning, Mexico is not a big country. It's a middle-income country. And in the study, all the way up to 2050, if we continue the decarbonization, we would be ranking the top spot about the benefits of incorporating the sustainability element into the energy sector, and that means job creation, regional development, and the respect of the social aspects of the Mexican population. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that is a very a good point to raise to draw out of the study actually. Ms. Aderohani, the air pollution conference, I was at a conference, it was amazing, and sometimes I felt I was at energy conference, not a WHO conference. What made you decide to have an air pollution conference? It's the first one ever.
Yeah, well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to all these panelists. This is a great opportunity to speak to you all. So WHO has been actually tackling air pollution for a number of decades. We've developed normative guidance, we've been tracking the exposure and the health burden, and we've got, in 2016, we estimated 7 million deaths are attributed to air pollution. And this number is increasing in many countries, and it's typically those low middle income countries where they already lack access to healthcare services and what have you. So we need to find ways that we could really protect health at the root, really be protective. And so accordingly, we decided to really bring a number of different actors around the table, because 7 million deaths is just the actual health outcomes. It doesn't account for all these other costs, health costs, livelihood costs, collecting fuel for women and children and the risk that puts them into. It doesn't account for the healthcare system costs. This is just the actual disease outcomes. So WHO really felt that it was really important to elevate this issue. And considering the current world and the current agenda with Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, etc., this is the time to really capitalize on protecting health through mitigation of air pollution. And it also leads to this idea of protecting from climate change as well, because the air pollution figures, these 7 million, only account for those directly related. It doesn't count for the actual health impacts from climate change and what it's happening across the world, particularly in small island developing states and those low and middle income countries. So we basically called this conference as a result of, in response to a resolution that was passed in the World Health Assembly in 2015, where all member states, which is essentially all ministers of health, all unanimously agreed on a resolution on air pollution and health, which therefore led to this conference. We basically called for a conference to elevate this issue. And so we really wanted to make this conference as an opportunity to bring a number of different sectors at the table. We have an important role. The health argument is something that can really convene a number of different actors together. So we had this conference to bring those people from the health sector, as well as the environment sector, energy sector, civil society, to really understand, first of all, teach them about the problem, and then more importantly, identify the opportunities to work together and to really develop this political high-level commitment to tackling this, as this is not a problem that can be solved by one person, and it's a problem that really needs to engage, for example, the energy community, as they are the most important polluting sector, but that, addressing energy, getting clean and sustainable energy has so many benefits for health that we really felt that this was the opportunity and this is the prime time to do so.
So what are the few main themes or few conclusions that came out of the conference that you are carrying forward as WHO, and how do you plan to translate them on the ground?
Sure, thanks. Actually, we still have commitments, voluntary commitments coming in as we speak. The countries and organizations are still writing to us to let us know how they are committing to really tackle this air pollution and health burden. But from WHO perspective specifically, our RDG really acknowledged the importance of, for example, clean and sustainable energy in healthcare facilities, and how access to reliable energy and on-site renewable energy generation could really facilitate the delivery of healthcare services in those most remote settings or those low and middle income countries where healthcare facilities still lack any access to electricity. So he committed to really enhancing this idea of access to clean and sustainable energy in healthcare facilities. He also committed to this idea, the organizations, to take this leading role in developing this multi-stakeholder platform on energy and health, where we can really bring a number of different actors around the table to really attack and tackle this issue for air pollution and energy, and ensuring clean and sustainable energy to all populations at different levels. So we need both the political commitments at the top level, but also on the ground, where we can work and enhance and utilize community health workers speaking to households about the opportunity for clean energy. And then we have the technical health workers working with technical health workers in the energy sector to really make sure the solutions and innovations they're putting out can really provide the health benefits necessary. So there was this multi-stakeholder platform on energy and health that he's committed to, and our organization's committed to. A third way is that we really, as I mentioned, community health workers and other healthcare sector can really be advocates for change for clean and renewable energy. So it's decided to really harness the power of the health sector to really speak for clean energy, to speak for air pollution, its health impacts, to speak to the community, to speak at policy levels, at a variety of different levels, to really of how we can tackle air pollution through various mitigation efforts involving energy in the households, transport sector, energy production, distribution of energy, etc. In addition, this builds also upon the climate change mitigation side of things. WHO has a long progress, a large program, an extensive program on adaptation and mitigation, in which we really want to further enhance the mitigation opportunities in line with the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda. So we're really trying to harness the work of the healthcare workers to help make that happen. And then we also have our Director General also really committed to scaling up the program and a country capacity to tackle air pollution. So again, if we want the health sector and community to really tackle air pollution, we need to empower them, and that would be addressing these clean energy and renewable energy sources. And so there's commitment to really scale up this program even further, because we can see there's a great demand of member states and other actors from civil society, private sector, to really give them the know-how to make the health and energy and climate a real benefit win-win-win for all. And finally, he really felt that we needed to really strengthen the institutional mechanisms and how we can explore and establish different mechanisms in international ways of really working on air pollution control, whether that be through some kind of convention or what have you. What is some way that we can really harness the opportunities that each sector can provide in a way that protects health and that tackles this air pollution while also mitigating climate change at the same time? And we will continue to share this information, and we will continue to share all these commitments as they come in, and we'll, as soon as they're available, they'll be available online.
It would be really interesting to see collectively what we have done as countries and institutions in terms of commitments at the conference. And it was absolutely fascinating conference. At the same time, there was an Offgrid conference in Singapore, and I think actually somebody for he was our next panelist, Mr. Eko Matser. He was present there. And, you know, we were all talking about the different aspects until now, different aspects and priorities in countries and institutions. And there were mentions of different strategies, but you always have this underlining fairness and inclusiveness that is emerging in the discussion on energy transition. No transition can be successful unless it is the one that brings everybody along. So I want to ask Mr. Eko Matser of HEVOS to talk to us about the way that they are addressing the energy transition on the ground, because they're working with communities. And you have come up with business models that provide a green and social inclusive energy services to most marginalized communities, most remote communities. Can you tell us a few examples and a little bit also speak about your approach? How do you go about deploying renewable energy?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be part of this panel and listening to my colleague panelists as well. Maybe just to start with a little bit on HEFOS, because it's not that well known as the countries that have been speaking already, or the WHO. HEFOS is an international organization working in several countries, having offices in Africa and Indonesia and Latin America, but working also locally with partners to change the course. The way we do it is normally to combine implementation of programs with advocacy on policies, but also trying to find new solutions with local partner organizations. One of the important examples in the energy space is our Sumba Iconic Island approach in Indonesia, an island with 700,000 inhabitants, with a very low energy access rate. And together with the Indonesian government, the private sector and civil society, we have achieved on a mission to have 100% renewable energy for this island, to make sure that people have not only energy access, but also renewable sources on this island. And it's very encouraging to see that all the different stakeholders are very much behind that objective and together move forward in achieving that goal. And that's maybe a more practical part of our work. In general, we say we are a very long supporter of 100% renewable energy, because we see it's not only important for to prevent climate change, and it's very important for poor people facing these impacts first, but also that we see that people that have now no access to energy, the almost 1 billion people worldwide that have no access, are best helped with renewable energy. Because if you have locally in far off grid situations, renewable energy is available while big projects with fossil fuels are not reaching those remote areas. So we see a double reason to work on renewable energy, to prevent climate change, but also to help people that have no access yet. So it's the fastest and most economical way to provide access to energy to people in remote areas is decentralized renewable energy. We're very happy to see that over the last years there has been a lot of support for this. I think at the international level the community is now agreeing on this approach. It's also good to see, for example, as Heather was explaining, that there is a big link to the health and the air pollution, especially in the cooking sector, a very important topic. And also the links with other SDGs on development, job creation, an estimated 4.5 million jobs that can be created by renewable energy in this way. We've also seen over the last years an enormous uptake of new business models, the better and cheaper products for energy access, more efficient appliances that makes, for example, solar panels with small LED lights very affordable also for poorer households. We've also seen that the initiatives are now ranging from community and cooperative models to startup companies, specific companies, for example, working on solar home systems, to global companies working on mini grids, for example. So a wide range of companies and initiatives now trying to make sure we have this 1 billion people connected. We also see new business models, pay-as-you-go systems, other ways of smart grids. We see also companies that work on solar irrigation, of solar cooking, and I think all those initiatives are very much needed to bring about the needed development in the rural areas. We also see a positive change in financing, new financing models that can address better the needs for poorer societies, result-based finance, blending of private and public finance. And finally, we see more and more, I think it's a bit based on the older experience in Bangladesh and Nepal with aggregation of funds, so pooling funds together and then using those funds to support smaller and more local initiatives. We now see that also in the private sector by Sun Funder, for example, Acumen, that are funds that pool together big funding and also make sure that it is used at a more local level. So that's all a big opportunity to change to prevent climate change, but also to provide energy to people in remote areas. But nevertheless, if we look at the figures where we are now, we see that we are far behind. Recent figures from the Climate Policy Initiative and Sustainable Energy for All show that Offgrid has doubled over the last years, but it's only 1.3% of the needed finance is going to off-grid renewables. Also on Ongrid, we see that the residents are poorly served. It's mainly going to bigger installations and bigger industry. So also there is a big step behind. And I think even the most worrisome is on cooking. Cooking is also a very important topic, but still only 1% of the needed finance is available. Cooking is, of course, very much linked to the health of especially women. But we see also one other important factor worldwide, that women are still not well enough represented in the energy space. They're mostly seen as consumers or victims maybe, while we think that women should be seen as the ones that can make a difference, as entrepreneur, as planner, as people taking initiatives and taking decisions in families. So I think there's a much greater role needed for women in the energy space. Having all said that, maybe I can conclude with some things I need to change and can help us to achieve the needed changes. And that's very much linked to climate, or to finance, sorry. There needs to be really a change in the flow of finance. Finance is now at international level far too much going to the big economic centers, the middle income countries, while the least developed countries are not receiving enough funding. Also, decentralized renewable energy does not receive enough finance, and cooking. So that's the first task for the multi-development banks, to really put more effort in those kind of areas. It's also important to make sure that more finance is going to support private sector and business models in less developed regions. We cannot expect private sector to invest in those most marginalized regions, because that's just not sound business models in most cases. So we think that public money and public finance should be used to support businesses in those most difficult to reach areas. As said, aggregators can be very helpful. Aggregate, pool money together and also use that to spend it in different forms is a very important element. There needs to be de-risking of finance in several ways, several tools. On national level, we need a very clear, predictable policy that includes on-grid and off-grid solutions. And there's a big need to include the productive use of energy, the demand side of energy, while planning these solutions. And then to conclude, there's a need to create awareness that these kind of decentralized solutions are really key for development, to support economic development, but also health and education and safety in those regions. And I think it has been said quite well by Sustainable Energy for All. We need to decarbonize, to decentralize, and to digitalize, to make sure that we leave no one behind.
Thank you. I actually wanted to interrupt you a little bit before, but you know, you raised a couple of interesting issues. You know, one is on gender, that but we haven't spoken about it before, and we know there's only anecdotal evidence around this. And at IRENA, we're actually trying to do something right now. We're collecting we're undertaking a survey to get real information on what sort of an impact is there by renewable energy in the context of gender, and then that we can identify with this empirical evidence to identify the areas how to advance it. But when you talk about access, it's probably more evident, and you're working on the ground. So just like when you go to a community, who do you speak to? Who are the people that you discuss with? Who are the first takers? Do you have how do you go about convincing people that to take up renewable energy?
Yeah, I think there's not one answer, because of course you cannot speak to one person or one official to make it happen. I think first of all you need to be really engaging with leaders, but also with the people themselves, getting their stories, their perspectives, especially from women, because they have mostly the best information and the most relevant information. But if looking at the communities and convincing them of renewable energy, I was myself involved in this Sumba Iconic Island approach at the beginning. And to my own surprise, I was going there and expected that I would have to explain to the local leaders that renewable energy is a good solution. And to my own surprise, they were all already convinced, because they were all aware that the coal power plants will never reach that poor island. They knew that a big infrastructure will not come to these poor areas. They knew that a smaller scale and more locally available renewable energy was much more of their future. So there was no need to convince them, and that also made me more convinced that we have to go that way. And I think still far we see that it's really working out, that renewable energy is the solution for remote communities.
Thank you very much, and that actually gives us a nice segue to call our next speaker, Dr. Costa of Falck Renewables. You are a company, but you're a company that has a different approach to renewables and deployment of renewables that takes into account some of these social issues emphasized by other panelists. And I was actually just, when Mr. Matza was speaking here, talking about pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go was an innovation from Kenya. It was not a transfer from the West. It was something that came about in Kenya. So there's a lot of innovation happening on the ground in developing countries as they move forward with this. Can you tell us from your company perspective, what has changed in the last few years, and what do you see coming in the next 5 to 10 years in the energy sector?
Thank you very much, and hello, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's a $10 trillion question, I would say, in the sense that very much is going on. It would be probably more complicated to have a forecast a few years ago, but no, I'm not saying that it's that clear, but still there are some leads that can tell us how the future is going to be. From a excuse me, from a let's say technology standpoint, we are seeing technologies that are more performing. And this will go further on in the next time, and this will have an impact on the cost of these technologies, and also on the possibility of deploying them on a wider geographical scope. For instance, as you have correctly and very interesting noted, there is a reverse flow of innovation in many cases. There are experiments and innovations that are occurring in developing countries that then they are taken back as good lessons and good business models to be deployed in developed countries. From a system perspective, what the future will show even more than the hints that you see today is a coupling of different systems. Is coupling of generation, renewable generation, with coupling of storage. If you want to have a look at those dynamics and see the way they're taking off, you can take a look at what's going on these days in Australia, for instance, and what Bloomberg Finance has just released just a few hours ago, saying that the combination of solar PV and electric storage is already competitive with respect to coal and gas in Australia itself. But what I would see, and I really appreciated Eko's thoughts a few moments ago. Where you will really see the innovation, to me, is more on the relationship with stakeholders. So it's between the industry from one side, the rulers, the government, the regulators from the other side, but mainly local community, local people, and the local markets. How do you see this? You'll see it in many ways. You see it by the fact that, for instance, it's not time to explain what renewable energy is for. It's more time to explain which are the opportunities that renewable energy is taken to the ground, is taken to a local system. You'll see this very much in terms of opening the ownership of renewable assets to local communities, whether it's in terms of equity or it's in terms of investing on finance of renewable energy projects. That's actually something that at Falck Renewables we are pretty much working on. We already have a 10+ year experience in this kind of engagement, and also in opening up part of the financing of our wind farms to local communities, so that there can be, let's say, a redistribution of part of the profits to the territory itself. So in the end, I would say you will see something which is a sort of democratization of energy, and the drivers are the three pillars, the three drivers that have been mounting this entire panel about. So it's decarbonizing, digitalizing, and decentralizing.
Thank you. Thank you. And you know, we always it's very inspiring to hear what's happening on the ground, and how you know, how many of the barriers that existed 5 years ago no longer exist, because they were either overcome by technology or just simply demystified in the process of work. And but still, when you talk about renewables, especially about variable renewables, solar and wind, there is still this lingering misconceptions about reliability and what you can and cannot do, and it's more known what cannot be done than that Germany, for instance, runs a very high share of renewables in its grid. So how can we go about debunking some of these myths? How do we have a better collective action to help demystify some of these areas, to encourage, to give confidence to policymakers to move on with the ambitious agenda on renewables?
Oh. When you say debanking is nice, and it sounds also like, how do you make things more bankable from an industry perspective, of course. I'm sorry for this silly joke of words, but it makes sense. Let's try to figure out just two simple things. One is in terms of let's say the risk that you're incurring when you're building or you're creating and then managing a renewable asset. The main issue, for instance, is that costs are pretty much predictable right from the start. You don't have to rely on the fluctuations of the fuel, for instance, or the fuel price. Yes, you have the other, let's say, the other side of the coin, which is the second issue, which is the intermittency, the fact that you're not producing 24/7 when it comes to PV and wind. So the most let's say general ways of intending renewable energy. But this is something that it's overcome in two ways. One is a better management of the output, and digitalization and technology are actually helping very much in this. So in all the forms of energy management. So it's becoming pretty much more reliable than what it was, and pretty much more predictable. And so also from a network standpoint, it's something that it's easier to, let's say, acquire. But on the other side, I quoted a few moments ago storage technologies, and that would be the game changer, because that, in a sense, if it's taken into consideration in an effective way, it's something that simply transforms. So the combination of generation plus storage transforms the intermittency into something that is not harmful any longer.
Thank you very much. You know, this was a very rich discussion, and we had a variety of inputs from different viewpoints. So I'm going to ask one question, the same question to all of you. I mean, you're coming from your vantage points, obviously, and you have listened to everybody else. So can you say what would be the number one way we can make a substantial difference as we go forward? And to speak about it in the context of CVF agenda. CVF agenda, these are the countries that are the most vulnerable to climate change. These are the countries who have provided leadership in thought and practice by committing to 100% renewable strategy. And these are the countries who remain at the political forefront in this effort. So what is it that we can do to make a difference and support them in this effort? Professor Fakaloubey, and I kind of start with you.
I think, as I've mentioned earlier, the most important issue for the CVFs are basically two. One is to build their technical capability. There are lots of potentials for renewable energy in most of the countries. If you consider Ethiopia, we have a huge potential to make use of renewable energy, but we need to build the technical capability. And the second one is financing. We have to look for alternative and multiple sources of finance, including private-public partnership and also the users. I think if we focus on these two basic issues, provides that we have the strategies in place, I think there are success stories. As we know, we already have success stories in some countries. For example, Costa Rica generates 100% of its electricity from renewable energy already. In Bangladesh, a single project has made solar power available to millions of households. In Ethiopia, we have been building one of the largest and most efficient hydroelectric plants in the world. In Morocco, we have the largest solar plant, and this is only the beginning. And so there are lots of potentials, and there is a lot we can do. There is also very substantial potential for us to collaborate, South-South, and also to make use of the available resources through our linkage, and to learn from each other and help each other and move faster forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beltran.
Sorry. Yeah, I would say that probably we should be continuing investing in developing technology. As long as we can compete with legacy projects, we meaning renewable energy, then the market will take care of deploying it at a large scale. So if we invest in developing new materials and how can we harvest new resources, then it's easier for the deployment of these technologies if they can compete with diesel or coal or wood even. And the other is, of course, coordination. There are some places in which it's relatively easy to solve the problem, but in other places, it's the help is there, but there's like a congestion in terms of international institutions. So I guess coordination, which is the platform provided by IRENA, SEforAll, and CAN. And of course, now that we have a new dimension coming into play with WHO, but that's really great. No, I mean, I'm coming from a country, and it's great to see that there's an opportunity to work collaboratively and coordinated with international institutions. Of course, you have the expertise. You have also, experiences that you can, get closer to us. And but I guess the bottom line, if we are to follow a path for a government, is that we are engaging into something competitive. The government is not very, I would say, wild in terms of decision making. We need to have some certainty that we are following a path that will not have, will not backfire the government. So I guess the point there is to say that for the companies and for the international community, if you can actually continue investing in technology, and proving the case that it's viable to have 100% renewables, then for governments would be easier, given that it's happening in many places. But we need to understand that there's the likelihood of not having success is low, given that we are responsible before the constituency, the population. So I guess in that sense, we are more averse to risk.
Thank you. Heather, can you give us your 2 cents?
Being that I am the health community speaking to a bunch of energy community people, I think my key answer as WHO is that we all need to be around the table, I think, and whether we can leverage that health argument, we should use it and capitalize it as we can. We have to really have the climate, the environment, the energy, the health workers, the urban planners, everyone around the table to really talk, because this is something that we all have to play our part in, and we all have each a critical role to play. But as Leonardo had mentioned, it is important that we are all coordinated in the way that we do, so we're really synergizing our efforts and not replicating and duplicating processes. And also the health community, as innovations are having, we can provide this technical recommendations that really help drive the innovations to ensure that renewable energy technologies that are put out there can really provide the health benefits, typically from air pollution mitigation, that can improve health, but for other health risks such as occupational health and what have you. So let's make sure that we have all sectors around the table and that we're using the evidence from these different sectors to make sure we're making policy decisions and programmatic decisions that have benefits for all.
Mr. Matzer.
I think I'm not muted anymore. Okay, sorry. At a country level, for me, the most important will be that there is a stable and predictable policy, including a very good planning of on-grid and off-grid. Bring them forward both, you need them both. Make sure you do that in a multi-stakeholder, a multi-actor approach involving private sector, involving civil society and the different government layers. With a big aim that you know that in the end renewable energy is cheaper and will bring more development to your regions. And then maybe secondly, on a global, more financial scale, use public funding really for the least developed areas. Develop more policies and more finance instruments to make sure the private sector can invest in poor areas. And that means de-risking, it means subsidizing specifically for those areas, and public money should be used for those areas and not for those that already have a strong economic situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Costa.
Well, I would say 3 different points. From one aspect, yes, having stable rules. That's the. I mean, there's the principle zero of defining an investment or defining a strategy from an industrial standpoint. So certainty of rules, stability of rules. The second aspect is diversifying the technologies and the systems. And the third point, which is very much relevant as the other two are, is showing at local level that renewable energy business is an enabler for more socioeconomic opportunities, whether they are creating more jobs or relying on local supply chain, or as I described before, opening and engaging local communities in the business itself.
Much. Thank you very much for your inputs. I'm just going to round up a little bit of what we discussed. It was a very, very rich discussion, and I don't want to be repeating or summarizing what we said, because I hope we're going to be able to rerun this panel over and over again to hear again what you all contributed. But you know, it's very clear that the deployment of renewable energy is not the fuel replacement. It's a different system that is emerging, one that treats energy as a service, something that is used to meet a range of economic, social, and environmental objectives. I want to draw on something that Leonardo said in his last intervention, and he said that governments are cautious. They do not want to experiment because obviously the price to be paid is large if they make a mistake. So I really want to recognize the CVF leadership that before it was popular, they stood up together and they said, we want to go for this 100% renewables, even though at the time, a couple of years ago, it was more of a random occurrence. Right now it's becoming more routine, and maybe at some point in time we go back in history, and maybe this is going to be one of the decisive messages that came out of the group of almost 50 countries who said we want to make this possible, that trigger action around the world. In last account that REN21 issued, that there are 57 countries who have put this in their energy policies at the country level. But we are all on a learning curve. It is something different that is emerging. We need to be together. We need to stick together. We need to share experiences, and we need to support CVF countries in their vision, because they're displaying a political will and commitment to this agenda that will benefit us all. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Press.